Before I start this video, I need to clarify a few things. This two-part video series will show you how to repair or replace the most common type of reclining mechanism out there, which I call the one-piece mechanism. And that simply means that the parts are all assembled into one unit that is then installed into the furniture frame. To learn more about these mechanisms, see the videos Reclining Mechanisms Parts 1 and 2. Since these units are so common, you can find them in many types of furniture: reclining chairs, sofas, love seats, sectionals, and so on. And there are different styles and versions out there as well. Some will have a solid handle, while others may have a cable release, which you'll see in this video. Other versions that are electric have lift motors and other electrical components, so there will be some differences regarding how to detach cables, handles, cords, and so on before you can remove the mechanism. But once it's removed, they're pretty much all repaired in the same way. They can be rebuilt by replacing any damaged parts, or you can assemble a complete new unit and install that back into the furniture frame. In this video series, I'll be rebuilding a La-z-boy reclining loveseat mechanism, so you'll also get an overview of how to assemble and disassemble modular furniture. And finally, there are references to La-z-boy part names and fastener types for those who happen to have a La-z-boy product. But again, the basic principles for removal and repair are the same for many recliner brands out there. Okay, let's start the video. Today I have two parts of a La-z-boy reclining loveseat in the shop for repair, and both of these parts need repair work. But today I'm going to show you how to replace the reclining mechanism in this bottom section. Let's get started. Now, I can't show you exactly how to remove this back because the customer's already done that to bring it into my shop for repair. But I can describe the process for you. You start with this outside back panel here at the bottom. You lift this flap up. You see there's some Velcro here. This has to be pulled loose from the underside of the bottom frame. Once you have that loose, lift the flap up, and you'll see here there are back brackets, and these are identical to what La-z-boy uses on their reclining chairs. On the chairs, they're mounted on the outside of the back frame. Here on the loveseat backs, they're on the inside, and basically that's the only difference. The principle is the same. To unlock these, flip the little lock levers on each bracket up so they point towards the ceiling, and then the backs will slide off. To reinstall, just reverse that procedure. Slide the backs onto the posts, flip the lock levers down, then stretch the outside back panel down and reattach the Velcro underneath the bottom of the chair. Now this section's already been taken apart from the rest of the love seat, so I'm going to describe how to do that in just a minute. But first, to work on a mechanism, we turn the bottom sections upside down. And if we do that on this section, it only has one arm, so the underside of the chair is going to have quite a substantial lean. So we prefer to have a level working surface. So what I do is I take a loose pillow and I put it underneath the seat to level things out. So let's start by doing that. Now let's talk a little bit about disassembling these units to work on them. Whether you have a reclining section of a sofa, love seat, or sectional, they're pretty similar in that they're all separate modular units like this that are manufactured separately. And they're brought together or held together in place by two different methods. One is the use of clips to hold the sections together where they sit on the floor, and the other method is by using floor rails, which this love seat uses. The floor rails go across the front and back of the mechanism and extend out so the adjoining section can be fastened to them as well. And there are 4 fasteners that hold this mechanism or section to the floor rails in the front and back. And on this unit, there's also a mechanism spring that is stretched between one of the cross supports to the rear floor rail. So the first thing you have to do before disassembling is to remove this spring. So you want to open the mechanism and move the footrest back and forth, and you want to find the position in which the spring has the least amount of tension or is stretched the least. That's the position in which you want to remove the spring. And you want to do that safely and properly, so be sure to see my video on that subject. Next, you want to remove the 4 fasteners that hold this section to the floor rails. And then you'll have this one separate so that you can work on it. When you're finished working on it and you want to reinstall, you simply reverse those steps. You want to install the rails first, and you want to finish up by reattaching the mechanism spring. If you're familiar with reclining mechanisms on La-z-boy chairs, you'll notice that this design is quite a bit different. This is what I call a one-piece mechanism, and what I mean by that is the parts are all pre-assembled and then the unit is installed into the frame as one piece. Now that's more common in the furniture market these days. This is the most common type. To remove this unit, I'm going to detach the activation cable and footrest. After that, there are 4 screws that hold this unit in place, and that will allow us to remove it from the frame. Let's disconnect the activation cable from the mechanism. So here's our cable coming in. Here's our plastic clip that's connected to this metal part on the mechanism. Here's our cable end, and it's held in by a little plastic tab. So let's start by releasing the cable end. I'm going to use a tack puller here to lift this little catch that holds the cable end in place. And there we are. Now we just need to wiggle this connector off of this metal part here. So here's our cable removed from the mechanism, and here's what the plastic clip looks like. Next, let's remove the 4 torque screws from the footrest. There are 4 screws that mount the mechanism to the seat frame. There are 2 on each side. So let's go ahead and remove these. I've already removed the screws on the opposite side, so let's go ahead and try to lift the unit out. Okay, now that we have the mechanism removed from the seat frame, it's a great time to do a quick inspection. Check the seat frame, make sure it's still in good condition. Check your seat springs and brace wire. Also, here on this side, the seat frame is bolted to the arm frame with 4 bolts. 3 here along this rail and 1 in the front. It's an excellent time to make sure those fasteners are good and tight. So let's do that. Okay, so I've got our one-piece mechanism here on the bench and ready to rebuild. Now you can rebuild the units while they're still installed in the furniture. It just depends on how you prefer to work. I prefer to do it this way. I think it's easier. Now this mechanism had a plastic part that cracked and failed on this side, and this part is not available separately. So to correct this issue, we have to order a new side subassembly, or this new scissor on one side. And I strongly recommend, if you have to replace one of these, to replace the other as well. They should always be replaced as a set. So that's what I've ordered. And if you're going to replace both scissors, I strongly recommend that you get a whole new replacement mechanism. For most manufacturers, you can request a complete replacement unit with mechanism springs and assembly hardware, and that's very important. And that way you should have everything you need to pre-assemble a new unit to install it. And here's why it's important to have a complete replacement unit. When you go to disassemble this, if you find some of the existing parts that you intended to use are damaged, everything comes to a grinding halt. You have to place a second part order and wait a couple of weeks before you can finally finish the repair. By ordering a complete new unit, you get all new parts and you don't have to worry about that. With La-z-boy, it's a little trickier. They won't send out a complete unit. You have to specify all the parts you need. So on this unit, I would have had to include these two cross supports, this center rod, this connecting pin, and some other miscellaneous parts as well. What I did instead was I carefully examined these parts to make sure they're still in good condition and can be reused, so I can rebuild this unit. But before we begin the rebuild, I want to show you a close-up of the failed part here. So let's take a closer look at what was wrong with this mechanism and why it needs to be rebuilt. What was happening was when the customer would pull the handle, the tension spring would fly off the unit. So here's where it hooks in the front, and here towards the middle, the other end, it hooks right here. And if we look a little closer here, we can see that this plastic part is split. So what would happen is when you pull the handle to open this unit, this end of the spring would simply pull loose from its connecting point. And as I mentioned earlier, this part is not available or replaceable separately, so we have to replace this whole side structure.